Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I'm going to be showing you a fairly standard scenario from Attack Sub, but I have taken a few liberties because the perceptive among you will notice that on the left here we have the Argentine submarines San Luis and Salta. Now the reason they're included in the game is because there is a hypothetical Falklands War scenario included. However, because both submarines were the reliable and much loved West German designed Type 209 diesel submarines, I am employing them in this scenario as West German boats. This is a hypothetical conflict situation where a limited war has broken out, let's say based around a Soviet invasion of Norway, and naturally NATO is intervening. Now, these two submarines are on a coastal patrol mission when they encounter a Soviet anti-submarine surface group. Now, this consists of the guided missile destroyer Simferopol, the small frigate Predanye, and off-map, as it were, they have a potential reinforcement in the form of the frigate Rovnosny, which can be brought in later. And just a very quick word about the setup. You'll notice that while both the San Luis and the Salta, forgive me, I haven't got round to giving them German names, each submarine has an individual contact marker on their Soviet opposite numbers to track their own sonar locks on these vessels. You might be wondering why there's only a single red star marker on them. And that's because surface ships in this game, unlike submarines, do have the advantage of being able to link and share their data. So what each helicopter and surface ship sees, the rest of the squadron sees. It's a crucial advantage for surface ships because in this kind of game they don't have all that many advantages. As you can see, while they have fairly formidable anti-submarine ratings, well, actually, to be perfectly honest, the Predanye doesn't. They are weaker on sonar, they're noisier and easier to detect, and quite frankly, they don't have that much going for them, so the ability to share information on a target is crucial. So the first thing that happens in the game is to draw off for initiative. So the West Germans have drawn a random number of 4. The Soviets have 2, so the West Germans go first. It is deck 1. Now, to win a scenario, you have to achieve a higher combination of sunk enemy vessels and or exited friendly vessels in order to win. So let's say the West Germans end the scenario by sinking one of the Soviet ships and both of them successfully withdraw without loss. Then that is a clear NATO victory. The decks function as a timer. So this little counter reminds me that we're on deck 1. And to successfully exit, a ship has to play a close or open range card and then draw a random number lower than the current turn in order to make its getaway. So this early in the scenario, it's very unlikely anyone's going to be cutting and running. So both sides draw their starting hands, and both sides will start with 5 cards. Now, the method in which that's worked out is that each player always has a hand of 3 cards, regardless of how many vessels they have under their command. In addition to those 3 cards, they get 1 more for each active vessel and helicopter that they have in play. Now, active is important because there are some rules in the game that allow for submarines to go into what's called a systems shutdown, where they effectively run quiet and play dead. It's a desperation measure after you've been damaged or hit in any form to try and convince the enemy that you're nothing more than a helpless hulk. Unfortunately, by doing that, you then lose the ability to be proactive with that submarine, and that is reflected in your reduced hand size. Naturally, if one of the ships or subs in your formation is sunk, then your hand size correspondingly decreases. So, on to the card play, and the West Germans are going first. There's not an awful lot they can do with their starting hand, although they have some good defensive cards there. So one of their submarines, I'll pick on that one, is going to try and detect the Russian, or Soviet, as I should say, surface ships. So they're going to play active sonar, and you can play it on both. Now, the Soviets are quite gleeful about this because looking at their hand, they have two passive sensor cards, passive sonar cards. And what they're going to do, because they are a reaction card as well as a play on your turn card, the moment the NATO player declares that they're going to play active sonar, the Soviets will respond. And because each Soviet ship is playing one of those cards, they gain 2 detection points on the submarine that's going active. Not a great start for NATO because they haven't yet determined whether they've detected the Soviet ships or not. So their sonar sensor rating is 2. They get a +1 because active sonar gathers data faster, unfortunately at the risk of making you easier to detect. So for the Simferopol, they have 2 already. They need to equal or exceed 5. The random number is 6. Excellent. They have gained a contact on the Simferopol. They're going to chance their luck and do the same with, oh no, a malfunction. Oh dear, not a brilliant start for NATO at all. So they gain a level 1 malfunction counter on their sensors. And also, unfortunately, they lose the point of contact they've just gained on the Simferopol. So that was a terrible first turn for NATO. They do have a technician card who can automatically repair the malfunction, but that'll have to wait till next turn because each vessel can only play 1 card on its turn. And the second submarine, of course, cannot play the technician to aid the first. They're not on the same ship. Makes sense. So NATO sighs, draws a card, and hopes for better luck next turn. The Soviets, for their part, are feeling positively gleeful. Now, despite their success in picking up the contact, the diesels are so quiet that their star is still in the no attack box, so all they can do is track the submarine for the moment. However, what they are going to do is the Simferopol, with her ability, is going to put a helicopter in the sky. And what that does is it increases the Soviet hand size to 6. So not a bad start for them either. Or I should say not a bad start for them at all. They've drawn some cards they can't use. The grey band cards are only usable by submarines, so they'll be discarding those next turn, but they have enough to give them some options. Back to NATO. Well, that submarine up there is going to certainly be fixing her sonar. Sharpish. But what else to do? There's an awful lot of Soviet power gathering, and they're probably going to want those defensive cards soon. There is a temptation, if it weren't for the need to fix the sensors, to probably use that contact reduction card now to try and reduce that back to 0, but they could only take the 1 action, and they can use that card defensively, so hang on to it for now. NATO will draw a card. Oh, 2 contact reductions. Silent running this time. Very useful. The Soviets. As they have not been detected, it is tempting to play the close open range cards to bring their whole squadron closer to that 1 contact that they have. But do they want to do that? Because if you play a close open range card on a surface squadron, it is counted as the action for the entire group. Perhaps for the purposes of the Soviets, it might be worth playing that card to bring in their reinforcing ship and up their game even further. They opt to do that, so I'm just going to shunt the camera along to allow for the fact that the Rovnosny has caught up with her squadron mates and is here to join in the fun. Let's just bring that up a bit. Brilliant for the Soviet Union, not so brilliant for NATO. Meanwhile, the Simferopol, her sensor suit is just as good as the helicopters, so she's going to rely on her own, and she's going to try casting a bit of a net to see if she can get a better fix on either NATO submarine. NATO is, of course, ready to counter. So she turns her, well, the sonar's constantly on trying to gather data, but they have a chance of building up the picture that they want to have so that they can fire. However, before they draw their random number, the Sun Louis, or whatever the German equivalent name is, plays contact reduction thermal layer. So the base sensor value for the Simferopol is now 0. She draws her random number and it's just a 4. She needed a 7 or greater to increase her detection value, so that's no good. She's about to do the same to the Salter, but she is running silent. So base sensor value is now 1 because of the -1. And the random number is 0. So good attempt on the Soviet part, but they don't succeed in increasing their contact level. They will want to discard these 2 cards at some point, but you can only do that if you've taken no other actions this turn. So at the moment it's just blocking their hand up. But they still get to draw 2 cards. And they're still in a fairly strong position. NATO, by contrast, is really not in a position to do anything. They do want to keep those cards. They live in hope that one day they'll get contact level 4 on one of the Soviet ships, so they're going to hang on to that in hope and just draw their 2 cards. Oh dear, there's a card that submarines can't use, so the Soviets aren't the only one with useless cards clogging their hands up. So back to the Soviet turn. Their options are a tad limited now. In fact, there's nothing they can do with their current set. They need to get at least one more level of detection before they can even try deploying a weapon against one of those submarines. So what they're going to do is they're going to discard the 2 cards that they cannot use. And because the new ship has joined, their hand size is now 7. It's pretty formidable, and they are getting some useful cards. Not bad at all. Rather fearful of what's building up, although there's not a lot they can do. The NATO submarine that has been detected is going to try a bit of proactive silent running to see if they can reduce the contact level and frustrate the Soviet designs. They need a 4 or greater to achieve this, and they get it. So their contact level, or at least the Russian fleet's contact level on them, drops 1. Soviet player's probably grinding his teeth a little at that. And NATO has a slightly unproductive, but nonetheless quite useful turn. However, the Soviets are not going to let this one lie. They are going to attempt, again, they don't want to risk losing their helicopter because it's far more useful just increasing their hand size up there. In a good example of surface ships working together, the Simferopol is going to use her reasonably good sonar to try and build up a better target profile on that vessel so that the Rovnosny, with her better anti-submarine warfare ratings, can pounce on it. It's going to take them a turn longer than they thought, but they're going to begin the process. NATO has no cards that can counter, so it's a straight 2 plus 2 for 4. No dice. Damn those quiet diesels. So yes, that's all the Soviets are going to do this turn, so they just draw a card. They can be patient, they still have the advantage. NATO, on the other hand, is struggling for options, so they're going to have to go for discards. The helicopter is a bit of a no-brainer. They have no surface ships in this scenario, so there's no way they're getting that. There's no rules in this game for shore-based helicopter support, so if you have a purely sub-force, you're never playing helicopter cards. Now, ordinarily, it would be worth hanging on to a damage control card, but if you look at the two diesel subs, they are incredibly fragile. There is nothing beyond their basic settings and the sunk box. So for them, this is another useless card because a hit would destroy them, whatever it is. So there's no point hanging on to that. It's just taking up space in their hand. So we'll see what it gets replaced with. Ooh, very useful. Quite useful. Certainly for shaking their pursuers off. Soviets, meantime, are beginning to worry that the NATO subs are going to slip away from them. They're going to repeat their tactics of the previous turn. And Simferopol is going to go for trying to detect both submarines this time. I think I forgot last turn and she focused all her efforts on the San Louis. Not going to happen again. So active sonar still on the listen. We'll do San Louis first, but that dratted thermal layer is still helping them out. So the base Soviet sensor value is 0, plus 5. Better, but still not good enough. And meanwhile, Salta is benefiting from surface noise now. So a base sensor value of 1 for the Simferopol. Another total of 5. They're really not getting anywhere with this. Frustrating business for them. So they'll just draw another card. Ooh, an active. Maybe that might be worth doing. Yes, for reasons which I'll outline, that active sonar will be quite useful. NATO's been forced into another quiet turn because they can't really do anything. All these cards are too useful for them to want to throw away. So they're just going to draw again and hope for better days. Okay, finally. Back to the Soviets. They have a nice active sonar card. Problem is, they have no idea what NATO has, and if they start banging away with active sonar from their ships, it will give NATO a lovely chance to do what was done to them earlier by playing the passive sonar cards in response. However, if they get the helicopter to do it, then these submarines can't respond because you can't get a sonar lock on a helicopter by its very nature. Doesn't swim in the right environment, and it's nowhere near the parent vessels, so it won't really help. Has a sensor rating of 2, which is the equivalent of the Simferopol, so they are going to do it. The helicopter is going to drop an active sonar buoy. So the San Louis, which is the slightly more vulnerable of the two, is going to counter with contact reduction. So the helicopter's base value was 2, increased to 3 because it was active sonar, reduced back to 2 by the silent running. Plus, 9. Gosh, okay. Good result. So they have just increased the contact level on the San Louis. And they're going to do the same to the Salta. Now, she didn't respond, so 2 plus 1 for 3. Excellent work, that helicopter. they have detected a second threat in the area. Now, because the helicopter's taken an action, it has to draw against its endurance to see if it can stay aloft. They need a 3 or better, and they don't get it. So that helicopter did a sterling job with that active sonar, but it has now had to land. However, all is not lost, because while the helicopter did all that, the surface ships have not taken an action, and they can now legitimately play the close range card. And there is nothing NATO could do about it, because in order to nullify one of these, you have to play one, and they don't have one. Much more crucially, neither NATO submarine can actually see any of the Soviet surface ships. So they are going to bear straight down. They can't close on both submarines. They have to pick one. But the obvious target is the San Luis. So they're going to close in on her. Do you know what? I think I will give them German names. From now on, this is totally ahistorical, because I'm sure the Germans don't give these names out to submarines, but from this turn on, they're the Scharnhorst and the Gneisenau. It makes sense, I think. So that's the end of a good turn for the Soviets. Their hand is back down to 6 now with the helicopter gone, but they are setting themselves up for a very successful run at those 2 submarines. Now, the NATO vessels don't have anything that can quiet and can reduce their contact level, but the slightly less vulnerable Salter is going to take the risk of trying to get a contact on all of the Soviet surface ships. Bit chancy, she risks a malfunction with every random number she draws, but it could be worth it, and their situation's a bit desperate. The Soviets have only one card they can counter with, and that's the contact reduction surface noise. They're going to play it on the Simferopol because she is their most valuable surface asset, mainly because of the ability to put up helicopters and her own formidable sensor value. So because it's passive sonar, Salter's sensor value is 2, reduced to 1 against the Simferopol. She still does it, though. God bless NATO grade sonars. They have a contact on her. The Predanyi doesn't detect the Predanyi, and the Rovnosny. She does detect the Rovnosny. So the 2 most important Soviet surface units are on her scopes. And they're happy with that for now, so they'll draw 2 cards. Ooh, I think someone's setting up for an attack next turn. Now, as for the Soviets, they are in a position to make a bit of a mess. So the Simferopol, as she's been sighted already by at least one NATO submarine, is going to take a risk and see what she can get on her active sonar. Her courage is rewarded. NATO has no response to that. So a total of 3. Let's do San Luis first. Still didn't make it, only 6. What about the Salter? They do better with the Salter. They still can't attack her. They don't have enough data for a decent firing solution, but they're getting there. But regardless, the Rovnosny, benefiting from the data from the Simferopol, can now try. This is admittedly a bit of a hip shot. You can fire this from long range, but it's a very weak attack. But they are going to target the Scharnhorst. Scharnhorst, unsurprisingly, is not going to take that lying down, but let's do the weapons value. So the fire rating is 1. Rovnosny's anti-submarine rating is +2 for a total of 3. Scharnhorst deploys a decoy which reduces it back down to 1. They need to get past her ECM defense of 8. Good try. They would have needed a 7, but the Soviet weapon becomes confused by the decoy and fails to hit. Still, not bad. The first shot in the game has now been fired. And things are really hotting up, especially as the Soviets have some very decent cards there to set themselves up for a future try. Back to NATO. This is a tricky one. Scharnhorst, up there, is going to take a risk and use her own active sonar. Talk about courage being rewarded in the other direction. The Soviets have no counter to that. So let's see how she does with Simferopol. 3, 2 for 5. Just what she needed. She has drawn a bead on Simferopol. What about Predanye? Oh no, not another malfunction. Saint-Louis, or Scharnhorst as I should call her, is having a pretty unsuccessful game of it. So she loses her hard-won contact on the Simferopol, is back to being effectively blind with a malfunction. Gneisenau, on the other hand, has a choice of 2 targets. She could go for the Simferopol or the Rovnosny. She is going to take a chance and try killing the Simferopol. So slightly better weapons lock-on than the Soviets enjoyed a bit earlier. And her weapons rating against surface targets is a formidable +3. So that's a total of 5. The Simferopol has no counter to that. So 5 plus... Another malfunction. Oh no. NATO's really having a hard day of it today. So that could represent either the warhead's computer malfunctioning or the torpedo tube door may have locked up. Either way, the weapon launch was a failure. Not good at all. Somewhat downheartedly, NATO draws a fresh hand and prays, really. That's all it can do for the moment. Well, mind you, it could be better, could be worse. Back to the Soviet Union. Now they have some pretty decent attack options. They could either close to get even more shots in, but given that the NATO submarines are beginning to attack them, it's probably best if they try and get in a kill while they can. So the target is going to be the same. Rovnosny is going to do the firing, so it's a total of 3. Again, Scharnhorst is not having this and reduces